Jia looked up at the towering members of the Magnoran High Council. Their massive forms blocked the light from the three suns, casting long shadows across the judgment chamber. At 8 feet tall, she was considered a runt on their planet. The average Magnoran stood 15 feet tall, with the council members reaching nearly 18 feet. In their society, physical size determined everything: respect, opportunities, even the right to exist. Subject Jia, you have failed to meet the growth requirements for the 5th consecutive cycle, Head Counselor Tay announced, his deep voice echoing throughout the chamber. Despite medical interventions, you remain inadequate. Jia kept her face expressionless. She had known this day would come. Since childhood, when her growth charts first showed abnormalities, she had lived with the threat of exile hanging over her head. She had hoped her contributions might save her. The atmospheric purifier she designed now kept their city's air clean, and her gravitational stabilizers had revolutionized space travel. But none of that mattered on Magnora. Only size mattered. "Have you anything to say before judgment is passed?" asked Counselor Min, the only female among the 7 leaders. There was no sympathy in her voice, just formality. "My work speaks for itself," Jia said quietly. "My size does not define my worth." Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the chamber. Such talk was considered dangerous on Magnora, where the rigid hierarchy kept society functioning. "Your continued defiance only confirms our decision," Tay replied coldly. "The Council hereby sentences you to exile. You will be provided with a single exploration vessel and basic supplies. Your destination is the uncharted system designated X-279. Exile was a death sentence without the messy business of execution. Few exiles survived the journey to distant systems, and those who did rarely found habitable planets. It was a convenient way to remove the unwanted without explicitly killing them." That night in her living quarters, Jia carefully packed her most precious possessions: her personal data tablet containing years of research, a small holo image of her parents who had died years ago, and the miniature gravity manipulator she had been working on in secret. The guards would inspect her belongings, but they wouldn't understand the true purpose of the device. Her door chimed, and her only friend, Hana, entered. Despite being a respectable 14 feet tall, Hana had always seen beyond Jia's size to her brilliant mind. "I bribed the guard to let me see you," Hana whispered, looking around nervously. "I can't believe they're doing this." "I've been preparing for this possibility for years," Jia admitted. She pulled out a small chip from behind her ear. "Take this. It contains all my research. Maybe someday things will change here." Hana took the chip hesitantly. "What will happen to you?" Jia shrugged. "I'll either die in space or find a new world. Either way, I'll be free of this place." The next morning, guards escorted Jia to the launch bay. A small crowd had gathered to witness her departure, not out of respect but curiosity. Exile ceremonies were rare entertainment. Her ship was as small as she had feared, a basic exploration vessel with minimal amenities. The provisions would last 6 months if carefully rationed. The navigation system was preset to System X-279, with no option to change course. "The Council has been generous in providing you with Nari, a basic AI companion," the launch director informed her, as if granting her a great gift. In truth, all ships required an AI to function properly. As the guards secured her into the vessel, Jia heard whispers from the crowd. "Such a waste of resources on a runt. At least we won't have to look at her abnormality anymore. Maybe the ship will malfunction and save us the fuel for the return journey." The hatch sealed with a hiss, cutting off the voices. Inside the ship, Jia took a deep breath of recycled air. The launch countdown began automatically. "Hello, Jia," came a pleasant female voice. "I am Neri, your ship's artificial intelligence. I will assist you during your journey." "Hello, Neri," Jia replied, strapping herself into the pilot's chair. "It seems it's just you and me now." "Preparing for launch in 10 seconds, Neri announced. The ship vibrated as the engines powered up. Through the viewport, Jia watched the launch bay doors slide open, revealing the purple-tinged sky of Magnora. The vessel lifted smoothly, accelerating through the atmosphere. As they broke through the cloud layer, Jia caught a final glimpse of the sprawling city where she had been born, with its towering structures built for giants. She felt no sadness, only a strange sense of relief. Navigation systems online, Nari informed her. Course set for System X-279. Estimated arrival: 412 days. Is there any way to view information about our destination? Jia asked, already knowing the answer. I regret that detailed information about System X-279 is restricted, Nari replied. Basic scan data indicates 3 planets orbiting the yellow star. Only preliminary spectral analysis is available. Jia nodded. Of course, that wouldn't give her any advantages. This was meant to be a journey into oblivion. As Magnora shrank to a glowing point among the stars, Jia opened her tablet and pulled up the designs for her gravity manipulator. The device was small but potentially revolutionary. With some modifications, it might help her survive whatever awaited at X-279. Nari, what's the ship's power capacity? She asked. The primary power cells are operating at 98.7% efficiency. At current usage, they will sustain life support for approximately 437 days. Jia smiled for the first time since her sentencing. And if I wanted to run some experiments using the ship's fabrication unit, that would reduce life support duration, Nari replied neutrally. However, the ship is equipped with a basic fabrication unit for emergency repairs. Perfect, Jia murmured, already making calculations. She had 412 days to prepare for whatever awaited her. The Magnoran Council thought they were sending her to die, but Jia had other plans. As the ship accelerated toward the distant stars, she felt a strange sense of hope. On Magnora, her small size had made her an outcast. But somewhere in the vastness of space, perhaps there was a place where she would fit. A world where greatness wasn't measured in feet and inches. Jia looked one last time at the disappearing speck that was her homeworld. Goodbye, Magnora, she whispered. You won't miss me, but someday you might remember me. Then she turned her attention to the stars ahead and began to work. Jia woke to the sharp wail of alarms. Red emergency lights flashed throughout the ship's cabin. She had been in cryosleep for most of the journey, conserving oxygen and supplies. Emergency protocols activated, Nari announced, the AI's voice calm despite the chaos. Atmospheric entry unstable. Guidance systems failing. Jia scrambled to the control panel. Through the viewport, she saw a blue-green planet rushing toward her. After 413 days in space, they had reached System X-279, but something was terribly wrong. What happened? She asked, fingers flying across the controls. Unknown interference disrupted our descent trajectory, Nari explained. Primary thrusters are offline. Secondary systems operating at 34% capacity. The ship shuddered violently. Outside, the darkness of space gave way to fiery orange as they hit the planet's atmosphere. Metal groaned around her as the heat shield struggled to protect the vessel. Can we stabilize? Jia asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Negative. Crash landing inevitable. Survival probability: 62%. Not great odds, but better than she had expected when leaving Magnora. Jia activated her gravity manipulator, the device she had perfected during the long journey. It might help cushion the impact. Brace for landing in 30 seconds, Nari warned. Jia strapped herself into the crash harness, clutching her data tablet to her chest. The ship plummeted through white clouds, spinning wildly. Through breaks in the cloud cover, she glimpsed green forests and blue water. 10 seconds to impact. The ground rushed up to meet them. Jia closed her eyes and activated the gravity manipulator. The impact was devastating. The ship carved a deep trench through dense forest before coming to rest. Metal shrieked as it tore. Systems exploded in showers of sparks. But the survival pod around Gia held, protected by her gravity field. When the movement stopped, Gia sat in stunned silence, ears ringing. Smoke poured from ruptured systems, but the emergency air filters kicked in, clearing the cabin. "Nari," she called. "Are you functional?" "Primary systems damage," the AI responded, voice distorted. "Operating on emergency power. Life support stable." External conditions. Breathable atmosphere, temperature 22 degrees Celsius. Gravity 1.1 times Magnoran standard. Breathable air. Survivable gravity. Better than Gia had dared hope. She unstrapped herself, wincing at the bruises forming on her body. The ship's hatch was jammed, but the emergency release worked. As it slid open, sunlight and fresh air poured in. Gia stepped cautiously onto alien soil. The forest around her was dense with vegetation, but something seemed odd. She looked up at the trees and realized she was looking down at them. These trees would be considered small shrubs on Magnora. Even the tallest reached only to her shoulder. Everything was small. The rocks, the plants, even the insects she saw scurrying away from her footsteps. On this world, she was the giant. Gia laughed, the sound echoing through the forest. After a lifetime of being the runt, of looking up at everyone, she was now the tall one. She explored the area around her ship, marveling at the strange beauty of this world. The air smelled sweet, filled with floral scents. Birds with colorful feathers flew overhead, calling to each other in high-pitched songs. A rustling sound caught her attention. Jeb turned to see movement in the undergrowth. 3 figures emerged from the tree line, then froze. Humans, they had to be. Jia had studied ancient texts about Earth, a planet that Magnoran scouts had observed from afar centuries ago, but never visited. These had to be humans, bipedal, mammalian, with 2 arms and 2 legs. And they were tiny. The tallest barely reached her knee. They stared up at her, mouths open in shock. 2 males and 1 female, Gia guessed, based on their different body shapes. They wore artificial coverings in various colors. Clothing she remembered from her studies. One of the humans said something, the words incomprehensible to Gia. She reached for her universal translator, hoping it would work with this unfamiliar language. "Hello," she said, the translator converting her words. "I mean no harm." The humans backed away, clearly terrified. One raised a small device and pointed it at her. "Please," Gia said, kneeling to appear less threatening. "I am a traveler. My ship crashed." The translator seemed to be working. The humans looked at each other, then back at her. The one with the device slowly lowered it. "What are you?" asked the female human, her voice shaking. "My name is Gia. I come from a planet called Magnora." The humans whispered among themselves. Gia caught the word alien repeated several times. "You're so big," said one of the males. Gia smiled sadly. "On my world, I was considered very small." More rustling came from the forest. More humans appeared, these wearing matching dark clothes. They carried objects Gia recognized as weapons. Behind them came vehicles, rolling noisily through the undergrowth. The new arrivals spread out, surrounding her. Gia stayed kneeling, hands visible, trying to appear peaceful. A human stepped forward from the group. "I am Dr. Sun," she said, her voice steadier than the others. "Lead cynobiologist. Can you understand me?" Gia nodded. "My translator is working." "Are you alone?" Dr. Sun asked, looking at the crashed ship. "Yes. I was exiled from my world because of my small size." Gia couldn't help but laugh at how absurd that sounded now. Dr. Sun's eyes widened. "Small. You're at least 8 feet tall. On Magnora, our average height is 15 feet, Gia explained. "I was considered defective." The humans murmured among themselves. Their fear seemed to be mixing with curiosity now. "We need to move you to a secure location," Dr. Sun said. "Your arrival will cause complications. Can you walk with us? Jia looked at her ship. It would never fly again. I need to retrieve some items first. As she gathered her possessions from the wreckage, Jia felt a strange likeness. For the first time in her life, people were looking up at her with awe rather than disgust. The humans led her through the forest to a clearing where larger vehicles waited. They had prepared a flat truck for her to sit on, as none of their regular transports could accommodate her size. As they drove away from the crash site, Jia watched the trees pass by. On Magnora, she had been worthless. On this planet, Earth, the humans called it, she was remarkable simply because of her size. But she knew it was more than that. Her mind, her knowledge, her technology, all of these would be valuable here. She could start anew. She could matter. Jia looked up at the blue sky of her new home. The exile meant to kill her had instead given her a chance at a real life. She smiled as the convoy carried her toward an uncertain but promising future. 6 months had passed since Jia's arrival on Earth. She sat in her specially built quarters at the United Global Response Center, a facility hastily constructed to house and study the planet's first confirmed extraterrestrial visitor. The furniture was oversized to accommodate her 8-foot frame, and the ceilings were 12 feet high so she wouldn't feel cramped. Jia studied the holographic display floating above her workstation. She was reviewing designs for an energy converter based on Magnoran technology, but adapted for Earth's resources. Unlike on her home planet, here her intelligence and creativity were valued above all else. A gentle knock sounded at her door. "Come in," she called. Dr. Sun entered, carrying a tablet. The human woman had become Jia's primary liaison with Earth's scientific community. At first, Sun had approached Jia with professional caution, but over time, genuine friendship had developed between them. "Good morning, Jia," Sun greeted her. "How are you feeling today?" "Better," Jia replied. "The gravity adjustments you made last week have helped with the joint pain." Earth's gravity was slightly higher than what Jia was accustomed to on Magnora. Though the difference seemed small, it had caused her physical discomfort during her early months. "I'm glad to hear it," Sun said, sitting in a chair designed for humans, one that made her look even smaller next to Jia. "The energy conversion prototype is ready for testing. The team is waiting in Lab 3 whenever you're ready." Jia nodded and slid her finger across the holographic display, transferring her latest modifications to Sun's tablet. "I've adjusted the containment field. It should increase efficiency by 47%. Sun's eyes widened as she reviewed the changes. "This would have taken us decades to develop on our own." "It's the least I can do," Jia said, "considering the hospitality Earth has shown me." Hospitality was an understatement. After the initial shock of her arrival, humans had embraced Jia with a fascination that sometimes bordered on worship. News outlets had dubbed her the goddess of innovation after she helped solve a major power crisis in Asia. Children dressed as her for Halloween. Universities offered scholarships in her name for promising engineering students. She followed Sun through the facility's wide corridors. Staff members stopped and stared as they passed. Some nodded respectfully. Others whispered to each other. Jia was used to stares. On Magnora, people had stared at her with disgust. Here, they stared with awe. Sometimes she wasn't sure which was more uncomfortable. In Lab 3, a team of 20 scientists waited anxiously. The prototype sat in the center of the room, a spherical device about the size of a beach ball, surrounded by monitoring equipment. If it worked, it would produce clean energy at 10 times the efficiency of current technologies. "Ms. Jia," greeted Dr. Kim, the lead engineer. "We're ready when you are." Jia knelt beside the device and made a few final adjustments. "The principles are simple," she explained to the team. "We're creating a contained gravitational field that pulls energy from quantum fluctuations. On Magnora, we use this technology to power entire cities." She stepped back and nodded to Dr. Kim. "Activate the sequence." The device hummed to life. Lights flickered across its surface, and a gentle blue glow emanated from its core. The monitors showed energy levels rising steadily. "It's working," Dr. Kim exclaimed. Power output at 200% of projected levels and holding steady. The team broke into applause. Jia smiled, but her thoughts drifted to Magnora. There, her innovations had been dismissed because of her size. Here, she was changing the course of human history. Later that day, Jia addressed the United Nations Security Council via hologram. Her image towered over the assembly, ironically making her appear even larger than she actually was. The technology I've shared thus far is merely foundational, she explained to the gathered world leaders. With proper implementation, Earth could solve its energy crisis within 5 years. The medical applications alone could extend human lifespans by decades. And what do you ask in return for these gifts? Asked the Russian representative suspiciously. A home, Jia replied simply. That's all I've ever wanted. After the conference, Jia returned to her quarters to find Sun waiting with a worried expression. Is something wrong? Jia asked. We've received 17 new requests for private meetings with you, Sun sighed. 3 from major corporations offering billions for exclusive technology rights. 2 from religious groups who believe you're a divine messenger. 5 from military organizations wanting weapons technology. And the rest from various governments seeking special access. Jia wasn't surprised. Her presence had disrupted Earth in countless ways. Economic markets fluctuated wildly as industries tried to prepare for Magnoran technology. Religious leaders debated the theological implications of extraterrestrial life. Military strategists worried about security risks. Tell them all the same thing, Jia said. I work with the United Global Response Center for the benefit of all humanity. No private meetings. Sun nodded, but her frown remained. There's something else. Some groups are worshipping you. There's a temple in Thailand dedicated to the sky goddess Jia. And in Brazil, a commune has formed around someone claiming to channel your wisdom. Jia sat heavily on her reinforced couch. That was never my intention. I know, Sun said gently, but you have to understand, you've changed everything. You're not just a visitor from another world. You represent possibilities humans never imagined. For some, that inspires scientific curiosity. For others, it's spiritual awe. A notification chimed on Sun's tablet. She checked it and groaned. The president wants to schedule another dinner with you, and apparently, the Queen of England has requested a visit. Jia laughed despite herself. On Magnora, I couldn't even get an audience with minor officials. Now rulers of Earth want to dine with me. That evening, Jia stood on the facility's roof, gazing at the stars. Somewhere up there was Magnora, the world that had rejected her for being too small. If they could see her now, towering over humans, revered for her knowledge, changing the destiny of an entire planet, what would the High Council think? A shooting star streaked across the sky. On Earth, humans made wishes on such sights. Jia closed her eyes and made her own wish, not for greater recognition or power, but for wisdom to handle the responsibility she now carried. She was no goddess, despite what humans called her. She was simply Jia, an exiled who had found her place in the universe. As the cool night air brushed her face, she felt, for perhaps the first time in her life, that she belonged somewhere. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more technology to adapt, more politics to navigate, more attention to manage. But tonight, under the stars of her new home, Jia was at peace. The colonization fleet arrived 3 weeks after the scout ships. 7 massive vessels entered Earth's solar system, each carrying thousands of Magnoran soldiers. From the command center deep beneath Seoul, Jia watched the approaching ships on the monitoring screens. They didn't listen to Jun's warning, she said quietly. Did you expect them to? General Park asked, standing beside her. Jia shook her head. No, the High Council would never retreat because of a warning from a defect like me. The room was filled with military personnel and scientists from around the world. For weeks, they had prepared for this moment, implementing Jia's defensive plans. The captured Commander Jun was being held in a specially designed containment facility, his arrogance reduced to impotent rage. "All defense systems are ready," reported a technician. "Gravity disruptors online. Sonic weapons charged. Fighter squadrons in position." President Lee stepped forward. "Should we attempt communication?" "They won't negotiate," Jia said firmly. "But yes, we should try." The transmission was brief and predictable. The Magnoran fleet commander, a towering figure named Da, demanded immediate surrender. When President Lee refused, Da simply smiled. "Then you will be eliminated," he said, ending the transmission. The attack began immediately. The Magnoran ships launched energy weapons at Earth's major cities, but thanks to Joe's warning, the planet was ready. Shield generators activated, creating protective domes over population centers. The energy blasts dissipated harmlessly against them. "Deploy the gravity disruptors now," Jia ordered. Across the globe, transmitters activated, creating localized gravity fields around 2 Magnoran vessels. The ships listed suddenly, their crews disoriented by the sudden gravitational shifts. Earth's fighters, small but numerous, swarmed toward the disoriented ships. "It's working," Dr. Sun exclaimed. Jia nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the largest ship, Da's command vessel. Now for the frequency disruptors. Transmitters broadcast at precisely 142.6 Hz, the resonant frequency of Magnoran neural pathways. On their ships, the invaders clutched their heads in pain as the sound bypassed their ears and vibrated directly into their brains. "Launch Phase 3, Jia directed. Hundreds of small drones, each carrying a gravity manipulator of Jia's design, attached themselves to the Magnoran ships. The devices began overriding the vessel's propulsion systems, causing them to drift out of formation. But the Magnorans were resilient. Despite the disruptors, they managed to launch landing parties toward Earth's surface. Pods crashed into fields and cities, disgorging 16-foot soldiers armed with devastating weapons. "We need to stop them on the ground," General Park said urgently. Jia turned to the team. "I need to get to Da's ship." "That's suicide," Sun protested. "No," Jia replied. "It's our best chance. Their hierarchical structure is their weakness. Without leadership, they'll fall into chaos." Despite objections, Jia boarded a specially designed craft and launched toward Da's command ship. Earth fighters escorted her, darting around Magnoran defenses like insects, exactly as Jun had mockingly described them, but now a terrifying swarm. Jia's craft docked with a maintenance port on the massive vessel. Using her smaller size to advantage, she navigated through service tunnels too small for full-sized Magnorans to follow. She reached the ship's central power core, her real target. Most of the crew was incapacitated by the sonic disruptors, making her progress easier than expected. With swift movements, she attached devices to the core, not to destroy it, but to take control. Alarms blared as the ship's systems detected the intrusion. Jia worked faster, bypassing security protocols she had helped design years ago on Magnora. Finally, the last device activated, its lights blinking green. "Central systems accessed," came the confirmation in her earpiece from Earth's control center. "We're in." Jia made her way to the command bridge. When the doors slid open, she found Commander Da waiting, a gravitational weapon aimed at her heart. "The defect returns," he said, his voice dripping with contempt despite his obvious pain from the sonic disruptors. "I should have known you were behind this insect resistance." "It's over, Da," Jia said calmly. "Your ships are under our control." Da laughed despite his discomfort. "You expect me to believe that? You were always clever, little one, but size always wins in the end." "That's where you're wrong," Jia replied, activating her neural disruptor. Da fell to his knees. Behind him, the view screen showed Earth's fighters attaching more devices to the Magnoran engines. One by one, the mighty ships lost power. Earth's forces took control, capturing the vessels that had come to destroy them. "What you never understood about being small," Jia said, standing over the fallen commander, is that it teaches you to think differently, to find paths others overlook, to turn weakness into strength. She looked around at the bridge crew, all incapacitated by the sonic disruption. The age of size is ending, Dai. The age of adaptation has begun. 6 months later, Jia stood on a hilltop overlooking Seoul. The city had recovered from the brief battle. In the distance, she could see one of the captured Magnoran ships, now converted into a research facility. Humans and a small contingent of cooperative Magnorans worked together inside, sharing knowledge. Beside Jia stood Dr. Sun and President Lee, who had come to share important news. The Magnoran High Council has requested formal diplomatic relations, President Lee informed her. They're sending representatives next month, smaller ones, as you suggested. Jia smiled. After the failed invasion, a revolution had begun on Magnora. The rigid size hierarchy was being questioned for the first time in their history. And what about the Magnoran prisoners? Jia asked. Most have accepted our rehabilitation program. Sun replied. Even Jun has shown progress. He's studying human history, particularly stories of small groups overcoming larger forces. President Lee looked at Jia curiously. The council has also extended an invitation for you to return to Magnora. You would be welcomed as a hero of the revolution. Jia looked up at the evening sky, where stars were beginning to appear. Among them was Magnora, the world that had rejected her. No, she said finally. This is my home now. Earth is where I found my worth, not because I'm big here, but because here, size isn't what matters most. As night fell over Seoul, the city lights came on, powered by energy systems she had helped design. Somewhere in those lights were schools teaching Magnoran science, hospitals using Magnoran medicine, and research centers exploring the galaxy with Magnoran maps, all because one small exile had found her way home. What will you do now? Sun asked. You could have any position in the world. Scientific director, ambassador to the stars, advisor to the United Nations. Jia interrupted with a smile. I think I'd like to teach. Teach? President Lee seemed surprised. Yes, Jia said. I want to show Earth's children that being different isn't a defect. It's an advantage. That seeing the world from a unique perspective is a gift. As they walked back toward the city, Jia felt a deep sense of belonging. She had traveled across the stars as an exile, crashed on an alien world, become revered as a goddess, and defended her new home from her old one. Through it all, she had discovered that true worth came not from physical size, but from the size of one's heart and mind. The path ahead was still long. Earth and Magnora had much to learn from each other. But Jia would be there, bridging two worlds, not too small, not too large, but exactly the right size to make a difference.